Hi guys, it's Brooke here. I have a super quick favor to ask. When you have a moment, please take just a second to give this podcast a 5-star review. This will help me to continue the podcast and continue to bring these resources to the community. Thank you so much for that 5-star review.
Some kids' autism gets better just by getting rid of gluten and dairy. So I do try to have people institute the gluten and dairy free as well as the whole foods. Now, if somebody comes and they're having a weight problem and they're barely gaining weight, then I'm going to have them introduce something like zinc, which can really help with the taste buds. And if they're deficient in zinc and you bring up their zinc levels, often they'll become less picky with their eating. So I will have them, I don't want to contribute to a weight problem. So I will sometimes then start with the nutrients while we're slowly working on the diet. Rather than just, you can't, if someone only eats gluten and dairy, you can't just say, well, now we're pulling those two foods out. Literally, there's some kids that's their whole diet. So you've got to then, go more slowly. But then there's other kids that come to me and they've already taken out the gluten and dairy, or they're almost gluten and dairy free and they're not as picky.
Hey there, it's Brooke, and welcome to Finding Hope on the Spectrum, where I have heart-to-heart conversations with parents, professionals, and autistic individuals sharing personal insight and life experiences. Together, we dive deep into supports, programs, and stories that offer inspiration, insight, and most importantly, hope for the neurodiverse community. Before we begin with today's topic, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe to this podcast. And if you know someone who this would be helpful for, please pass it along. Remember to always stay curious, be kind, and have an open heart. All right, I am very much looking forward to our conversation today. And today I am joined by Dr. Lisa Loegering, an integrative developmental pediatrician who specializes in supporting children with autism, anxiety, and ADHD. Dr. Lisa completed her pediatric and developmental training at the UCLA School of Medicine and is also a certified functional medicine doctor through the Institute of Functional Medicine. She brings a whole child perspective to her work and currently practices in Del Mar, California. So welcome, Dr. Lisa.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, this is such an honor to have you. You are a wealth of information, and I just love the resources and the support you're offering to the community. And so I'm excited to dive deep into everything that you're doing in your work. And you really have such a rich background in both conventional and functional medicine. What inspired you to start Integrative Pediatrics of Del Mar and take a more holistic approach to children's health?
Well, as a developmental pediatrician, I was always involved with children who had developmental problems. So I actually saw autism before anyone had ever heard of autism, which is pretty crazy given that it's so common now. But literally, I had seen it for, like even in the 80s. And that was before no one even had heard of it. So I've always had my hand in it, and I've always also been interested in functional medicine or holistic medicine or integrative medicine, whatever is offered in that other realm that's not Western. But I think that some of those specialties had to kind of grow up and become more available to study and learn from, because I also feel like you can't just dabble. Like if you're a Western doctor, you can't just dabble in nutrients. You need to know what you're doing. So finally I was able to become trained, and I selected functional medicine as the first group that I trained with. And I have other trainings also, but that was where I started.
Fantastic. And what you mentioned that you were interested in autism, and I was just curious what drew you to that population.
So I was a general pediatrician, and I have practiced general pediatrics for many years with Scripps Clinic in the past. But a lot of kids do have behavioral issues, so I just wanted to have more understanding of that. So it was not just autism, but ADHD, autism, anxiety, just behavioral issues in children. I just found interesting as kind of an adjunct to general pediatrics.
I had the same interest, and I think when you have it, and you're just going to dive deep and figure it out.
Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And now I know your practice focuses on helping children heal from the inside out. Can you describe what a whole child or integrative approach means to you?
So depending on what, that is the presenting symptoms, the approach, it all starts the same, and it does focus on similar things. However, autism is much more complicated than, say, ADHD or even anxiety. But basically, I'm looking at nutrient deficiencies in children, which are common due to their diets as well as our depleted soil. I'm looking at lifestyle issues like stress, which for kids is school and activities and home life. Looking at their sleep, like the teenagers don't get enough sleep. I'm looking at their general health. Are they, having daily bowel movements? Are they having enough fiber in their diet, enough protein? So I'm looking at all these different aspects of their life and then coming up with a plan. And the start is kind of what I just mentioned. Autism is a little different because there's so many different areas, kind of like a puzzle that you have to work on, that are like weak enzymes, genetically different things not functioning well. And I actually found the integrative approach to autism difficult initially to understand. So if parents are listening and then what I say just sounds like too much, you just have to go back and do things one at a time. Because when I started in the integrative approach, not just the Western approach, I actually thought I didn't even understand what people were doing with autism. I thought, I'll just do ADHD and anxiety, and I just don't even like. It was way too much. Too many different things were being mentioned that needed worked on and fixing, and too many treatments that I didn't understand. But now, after years, I was able to, study and figure that out.
Yeah, well, and we're definitely going to talk more about your approach and how you support individuals with autism. I find it very comprehensive and fascinating work. And so I'm excited to have you share more about that. But I think it is so true that autism is so complex and in so many levels, and it really does require somebody specialized who understands it and can individualize a program to support each child individually. And now you've said to me that you do everything sequentially, explaining each step along the way. Why is that step-by-step process so important in a biomedical treatment approach?
I think it's important because children can't do 20 things at once. If each test and each thing that you're working on requires, say, 4 or 5 supplements, and then you're trying to fix 4 or 5 things at once, it becomes overwhelming to the parents. So, but people are at different stages when they enter treatment. So some people have already done some things themselves, and they're able to start a little further, do a little bit more, and at the same time. And then other people are still back on the diet and and the sleep, and they're struggling with that. And a lot of the kids are very picky. They're picky eaters, and they don't like the supplements. So it's, if they're a picky eater and then you're trying to figure out, well, what can I add the supplement to that they'll take? Because if they don't take the supplements, the plan doesn't work. And so then, I have kids that they only drink water. So I have a powdered multivitamin I like everyone on. But the parents will say, well, even though it can taste good, but they won't take it. They're just not going to take it. So it becomes complicated. So you can't give someone, a bunch of supplements when they can't even get one or two in. So you really have to start with where the family is.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that is such an important aspect of your work and how you just really methodically choose what is available to the family, what they can actually do successfully, even though you know all the things that are going to be needed. It's a very careful process, sounds like.
Right. Yeah.
So I think that's fantastic. And as you mentioned, it's very tricky because many of the clients, I see are very picky eaters or very sensitive to tastes and smells. And so it's quite complicated to go down this path, but can very, very well be done.
Right. If they could swallow pills, it wouldn't be a big issue. Like with an adult, you can give them a bunch of pills to swallow, but the younger kids who you want to actually do a lot of this work in, kids that are 3 and 4, they don't swallow pills, and they're not going to learn to swallow for a few years.
Right. Yes. Yeah, that makes sense.
And some don't even like gummies, if you can believe that. Some don't. They don't like gummies. They don't like the best tasting gummy.
Right.
So you become limited in what you can do.
Right. That is challenging. But I mean, it sounds like eventually you help the families find a way to be able to get what is needed done.
Yeah, it can be slower or faster depending on the family.
And now you mentioned diet, and I know that's a big area that we talk about in the field, and you often start with this and lifestyle. Can you share a little bit more about what you recommend for diet? I know it's quite extensive what you shared with me when we met. I'd love to have you share more about the components of diet.
So I like the kids to be on more of a whole food diet, which means to, get rid of the especially ultra processed foods. So, I tell families, can you at least, try to give your children, clean sources of protein, fruits, vegetables, beans, nuts, as long as it's not a choking hazard, nut butters. Can you, lower starch and sugar? They can have carbs. I want them to have carbs. I just want the carbs to be in like sweet potatoes and berries and fruit. And I want them to have plenty of fat. And I ideally want them to have meat products, just clean sources. And so whole foods is important, because I will see kids that they eat, granola bars and chips, and then they're picky, so they don't want to eat any of the real food, and they're just eating those snacky foods. And then some of them are on all gluten and dairy, mac and cheese, pizza. That's all they eat, cereals. And I also always try to frame things that are in their diet. If they're, a lot of times with labeling, people don't realize that a lot of the cereals or the bars are really like cookies or candy bars. So it's like that's that category. And yes, maybe you can have a little bit, but don't think of it as a meal. It's not a meal. So whole foods, but then also in the autism community, we like the kids to try to be gluten and dairy free for a while. It's not forever. So I tell people we're going to work on everything for a couple of years. And then, depending on how everything is going, when they're older, maybe they can, reintroduce some of the dairy or gluten. I mean, maybe not, or maybe they could reintroduce gluten but not dairy, or the opposite. It's not as if this is forever, but it's for now so that we can try to decrease inflammation. With dairy, now we know that it can cause some antibodies to folate, to the folate, the whole folate transport system into the brain. Some kids' autism gets better just by getting rid of gluten and dairy. So I do, try to have people, institute the gluten and dairy free as well as the whole foods. Now, if somebody comes and they're having a weight problem and they're barely gaining weight, then I'm going to have them introduce something like zinc, which can really help with the taste buds. And if they're deficient in zinc and you bring up their zinc levels, often they'll become less picky with their eating. So I will have them, I don't want to contribute to a weight problem. So I will sometimes then start with the nutrients while we're slowly working on the diet. Rather than just, you can't, if someone only eats gluten and dairy, you can't just say, well, now we're pulling those two foods out. Literally, there's some kids that's their whole diet. So you've got to then, go more slowly. But then there's other kids that come to me and they've already taken out the gluten and dairy, or they're almost gluten and dairy free and they're not as picky. So, but basically those are whole foods, organic, clean, and then gluten and dairy free, at least for a while.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Now, there are kids that have sensitivities beyond that. And so then that's a whole nother step of trying to figure out, like if you go through diets that pull out other things that make it more complicated, there are kids that need that, but that would be step 2 of the diet. So step 1 is the gluten and dairy. And there are some books, written on diet that people could read.
Great. Well, we can include that in our show notes too, if you have recommendations on those books.
And I think I forgot to send you that book, but I can send you a book that you can include in the show notes.
Perfect. Yes. And we're going to have many resources that Dr. Lisa is recommending in our show notes, and I'll have her share more towards the end. So definitely check out the show notes if you want to see those links. And the other thing you mentioned when we had met too was this idea of reverse osmosis water. And I was curious, why that recommendation?
So I do have everyone go on reverse osmosis water, which then you're in charge of filtering your own water. And so some people are buying water, and I just never am quite sure about the water source exactly, if it's as clean as I would want it. In California, we have uranium in the water, and that comes from the Colorado River that winds through old mining shafts in Colorado and picks up uranium. It's a very low level, so in and of itself, it's said to not be a problem. But in functional medicine, we think of toxins as additives. So we really want to get rid of as many toxins as we can. There's a lot of toxins we can never get rid of, and so those can be your basic toxins that you have in your body just because you're breathing the air and living in today's world. But for the things that we can do something about, like what's coming into our bodies through food and water, and that air we're breathing in our houses, we should try to not have those sources contribute to toxins. So the reverse osmosis water, it takes out everything. It's a filter you purchase. Costco has those filters. If someone is renting and they don't want to install something, there's some companies that make the countertop versions, where you can just go ahead and filter it with a countertop model, and then you can add a few minerals back in if you want. That would probably be a good idea. But in addition to the uranium, copper is added to kill any kind of algae in the water. And for many people, that's not a problem. But in autism, a lot of the kids have a weak enzyme that regulates zinc and copper. So they could have a high copper, low zinc. The higher copper can make kids more hyperactive, which a lot of my autistic kids are also very hyper. And another reason for giving the zinc, when you rebalance that zinc, so you bring the zinc up to normal by giving them a zinc supplement, and their bodies then automatically will kick out the copper. So you don't, it's not very hard to do. The only thing is if they're continuing to get copper into their bodies, then the body doesn't kick out the copper. And this does it, I would say, probably 8 out of 10 of the kids I see have this problem. A few kids have low coppers, and then the copper's not a problem. Well, then you might have to supplement with copper. So we're all very different. And that's why, even though I add the zinc initially, because everyone seems to need more zinc, I circle around and try to do a blood level a few months later to see where we're landing, make sure the copper and zinc are now normal. But the reverse osmosis water is just the cleanest water. And, there's microplastics in our water now. And I think the reverse osmosis is the main system that takes out everything. And the whole family will benefit. And people don't realize, so the refrigerator filters are not good enough. I look at hair samples from a lot of kids, and they have all kinds of filters. So I get a really good sense of, refrigerator filters, Brita filters. When I see the uranium in the hair, I know, okay, unfiltered or poorly filtered water is getting through. So it just, reverse osmosis is the best way to go for the whole family. The whole family will benefit. And, and then you have to change filters every 6 months. So you can't get it and then forget to change the filter.
Right. Fascinating. I mean, wow. Would you recommend that for anybody then? Just that?
Yes, really, because our water, like I said, our water is safe in the sense that it won't make you sick, acutely ill. It's got, the government is monitoring it for bacteria, parasites. So it's safe water, but toxins are another issue. And they're just, every few years there's more and more toxins. And in and of it themselves, each toxin might be okay if that were the only toxin in your body. But there's a cumulative effect. And in autism, kids do not detox well. So that's another reason why we focus on, not, people want me to detox their kids sometimes, but I want the parents to detox their kids. So I can't detox the kids until the, toxins are not going into the kids.
Right. That makes
There's
so much
no
sense.
point.
Right.
So they have, they have to not be having toxins go in.
Right. Yes. Or you're just repeating the cycle.
Right.
So, yeah, that
Right.
makes so much sense. I love that. It's just very proactive support to start with, just to get it going so that when you are healing, the system is more set up for success.
Right. And our detox abilities are genetic. And I don't detox well. I can do some labs and kind of get an idea, but I've looked at enough genetics in kids to know that it always comes up. They don't make glutathione well, which is your major detoxer. And it just, part of the population is like that. And so
Yeah.
as our environment gets more toxic, those are the people that get more sick. If it's an adult, they may have other autoimmune issues, other problems. If it's a child, possibly autism.
Yeah. Do you think that's why like we are more sick as a society? Is we're more
Yes,
exposed to all these toxins?
I think that that's it. I also think that we live in a more stressful society. So I
Yeah.
do feel that kids have more stress in their life, toxins
Yeah.
and stress.
Yeah. That makes sense too, for sure. And when you do these initial changes in diet and lifestyle, what kinds of things do you see in your patients?
I mean, sometimes the autism actually gets better if they're pulling out the dairy and gluten. So it really depends on the child, but often there is an improvement in focus and cognition and language, but it depends on the child. So it's only kind of the start, but now I'm thinking some of that improvement is due to that pulling out of dairy if they have the antibodies to the folate getting into their brain. I've seen people that, have pulled out the dairy and gluten, and there is definitely the child is brighter, and their cognitive, their autism is slightly better.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's so exciting and promising to see just with that change. Just you're on the right path. And I know I've seen many clients, most of my clients are on the gluten-free and dairy-free diet and are now it used to be such a thing like, oh, is it a thing? Is it not a thing many years ago? Now it just seems like everybody's really embraced it and believe that it's actually very valid.
Yeah, and there's collections of data that show improvement in kids. It's hard to do it as a double-blinded trial because it would just, you can't, people know what they're eating. So, but there are collections of thousands of families that have reported improvement with the diet. And I think with dairy gluten free, like 50%, which doesn't sound like a lot, but you have to consider even pharmaceuticals, nothing works 100%.
Right. Yeah. It seems like it's clearly worth a try. You
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So
So 50, like at least 50% report improvement.
okay, great. Well, I know you've mentioned some testing, and I'd love to have you share what kinds of testing you do to really understand what's going on in the system. And you have a variety of different kinds of tests. I know you mentioned the copper and zinc labs, and then there's also the OAT test and the IntellxDNA panel. If you could share just a little bit more about those tests and how they work.
So, depending on the family, so I usually will start with the supplements I know the child needs just from their history. Like, and we can talk about supplements later of what, like, I would typically put someone on. So, initially, I might do a hair test, especially if the parents aren't sure their filter's working, or they want to know, they don't want to do the reverse osmosis till I see for sure, that there's uranium in the hair. So, and I also, and then a number of families say, well, we may not be able to get blood work for a long time. So I might do a hair test to see whether the copper is high. If the copper is high, then I have a lot more leeway to push the zinc. So, and I know you didn't mention that test, but so the hair test would be one test that I might do in the beginning. However, if I know I'm going to be able to get blood work, which is more accurate later, then I might just start with nutrients and diet and things that don't need the testing. But but in the early kind of months, I will want to circle around because I treat with pretty big doses of zinc, and I've never had a problem. But I circle around and get blood labs from LabCorp or Rady's Children's. I send them through insurance as long as people have a PPO. So I will get a whole panel, including iron. A lot of the kids are low in iron, and iron is important for kids that have ADHD. So it's a cofactor in making dopamine. So I want kids to have adequate iron stores, adequate zinc stores. I don't want them to be too high in copper. I just do general like thyroid, vitamin D, a chemistry panel, a blood count. Kids generally don't get blood labs until they're teenagers, maybe, or maybe not even as teenagers. It's not something we do a lot in general pediatrics. So I will do those general labs, but especially I want to see that copper and zinc level. So that would be one test, a blood test. The hair test, which if I can't, I know I'm not going to get blood, I might do a hair test. An oat is a urine test, and it just has a number of markers. So the oat was created by Dr. William Shaw, who created it to look at what goes wrong in autism. He has a stepdaughter with autism, and he was trying to identify, what are some of those things we could look at in a test, in a urine test, that would give us information on what's going on and what we could do about it. So I do an oat in pretty much everyone, but I don't always do it the first thing. So it might be, after the second visit. It does cost around $300, and it's not covered by insurance. So that would be high up. The IntellxxDNA is a wealth of information. You still have to, in my mind, I still circle around and want to get other labs also, like the oat and the blood test. So it doesn't take the place of that, but it's a wealth of information. It gives you information that maybe no other test would, and it really defines like what supplements could be helpful. So it if you are starting with that, you can have kind of a roadmap. You have quite a bit to do for quite a while before you have to circle back and get other testing. It's expensive. So a little over $1,000. So and some families do want that because they just want all that information. And they're saying, they're also saying, well, I don't understand why my child has autism. And so the more information, the better, and the genetics really can be helpful. So I should say with autism, the standard of care also is which the insurance typically will cover, would be to get a chromosomal analysis as well as a Fragile X test. Usually they're normal, and so they don't result in intervention. They're just additional information. But it used to be that a lot of the kids with autism would go to a geneticist, and then they would order those tests, the chromosomes, which are looking at slightly different, not just genetic variations that would occur in autism, but the actual chromosomes, like you might find something, in certain conditions. But in autism, I find those are usually normal. Nowadays, a lot of people seem to skip that step, but insurance usually will pay for it if parents want to go that route also.
Okay. Yeah. I had a guest on that was a nurse, and she's getting certified as a MAPS doctor, and she has two kids on the spectrum, but one, she later did those testings and found out that her child had some abnormalities. And that helped them be able to, kind of decide next steps for that based on the diagnosis, and in addition to the autism. So
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, occasionally you find something. I would say most of my kids that have a condition, well, like Down syndrome or Noonan disease, it's been discovered based on other things that that could be seen in infancy. Like it was found early on before the autism because of other things.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, great. And do you decide, you kind of just go through a step-by-step process? All these tests, it sounds like, are kind of decided individually on when you're going to administer them.
Correct. Correct. Especially expense is an issue. So unless, and there's many more tests available. So like there's, the stool test that we might do at some point, and there are other tests, but everything costs money, and most of the alternative tests are not covered by insurance. So it depends on, I kind of spread them out. A lot of the tests that are urine or stool might be between $300 and $500. So maybe we would get one every few months. And then sometimes you get diverted, like the oat shows you might have mold, and then you have to do then the mold test, which is another $300. And then you find, oh, there is mold. And then that's a whole nother thing. But it comes up not infrequently. I mean, to the point where, I have a bunch of kids that we've had to do mold protocols for. And mold is just, in my mind, another toxin. It's one more thing the body has to deal with. Not everybody's sensitive. It's not a huge problem for everyone, but kids that have autism don't detox well. So you want to reduce the level of things that are interfering with their body and brain functioning well, and that includes mold. And with autism, you don't know what role it's playing really, because there's so many different things going on. So you're really just trying to fix anything that you see.
Right.
So I guess I should mention the FRAT Now test, because that's come up. So I also do that. It's not the very first thing I do necessarily, because depending on if we're, if we haven't even pulled out dairy, the treatment, if you have the folate antibody problem, is Leucovorin, which is high dose folinic acid, but you also should be off of dairy products. So we're probably not going to add that until we are pulling out the dairy. And many people say, my kids really can't do a blood test. So then we may not be able to get that test. But if we could, and that test is also about $300 and not covered by insurance. But if we could get that test, then I like to get that. And even if I don't get that at the beginning, I get the child quite a bit better with their autism, they're more settled down, I still try to circle back and get it at some point, because I feel like we need the information.
What does the frat test specifically help you with in terms of treatment offerings following it?
Well, it helps with the leucovorin, and ideally, in the perfect world, you want to have tests and then treatment that match what you find. But in the imperfect world, where everything costs money and kids don't want their blood drawn, and then and in addition, with the frat test, it's a home draw, which isn't as bad, but then often we're not able to get the copper and zinc level unless they actually go to LabCorp or Radies, because of the tubes and the preparation of the tubes. So then that's two separate blood draws. So ideally, if we find that someone is positive on the frat, then we really know that leucovorin could really be helpful, and that you may want to continue it for years. And if you don't know, you're just trying it, hoping that it would be helpful, but you don't have the data for sure that they have the antibodies, because about maybe 70% of the kids have the antibodies to the folate. It's not 100%. And for the ones that don't, there's still some indication the leucovorin could be helpful. So that's why we would still try it. But without the data, you probably can't, or you wouldn't push up the dose beyond what's recommended. Whereas if you knew somebody had the antibodies, and even going further than that, getting a lumbar, like the neurologists that did or a lot of the recent research will do lumbar punctures to actually demonstrate that there is, the fluid that surrounds the brain, the CSF, really is low in something related to the folate and will benefit by the folate. That diagnosis of cerebral folate deficiency is really made by doing a lumbar puncture. And that's what we're treating with leucovorin. So we're making a jump saying, because it's been demonstrated in a lot of the kids with autism, we're going to go ahead and try everyone on it. A lot of kids are not going to want to get the lumbar puncture, or the family, or
Right.
it may not even be offered. I don't think the neurologists around here in San Diego are necessarily doing lumbar punctures for that issue. Now, maybe they will start doing that in the future.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that makes sense. We're making some leaps in terms of treatment, but I am aware that some kids need higher doses of the recommended folinic acid leucovorin, and without some additional data, you're probably not going to be pushing up the dose.
This show is brought to you by Therapeutic Approach to Growth. Therapeutic Approach to Growth helps families with relationship and behavioral needs. Their holistic programs are individualized to honor and respect each family and their autistic son or daughter's sense of self through programs such as relationship development intervention, naturalistic ABA, and animal-assisted services. If you're finding yourself frustrated or discouraged with your current behavioral programs and would like to see more long-term meaningful growth for you and your family, then contact TAG today at www.tagforgrowth, that's TAGFORGROWTH.com, to learn more about how to schedule a consultation or how they can offer you the help your family needs, whether in person, remotely, or in a school setting. Again, that's www.tagforgrowth.com. Yeah, that makes sense. So can you speak to, I know you shared a little bit about leucovorin and what it is, but can you just share, I know this is a big topic right now in our field, and
Right.
I'd love to have you just share exactly what it is and how it works.
So it's basically a form of folic acid, which is a B vitamin, but it's at high doses. So we call it folinic acid. So you can think of it as activated folic acid. So it's bypassed a few steps. So if people have weak enzymes, it's already activated. They don't like if you have the MTHFR or some sort of weak enzyme system, you're bypassing that by having this activated form. It was created as a cancer rescue drug, which I know sounds peculiar that now we're using it in autism. But with chemotherapy, apparently some forms will deplete the person's stores of folic acid, and so this was developed to replenish those stores. So it comes as a tablet that's a very high dose of this folinic acid. And so then it was found many years ago that certain kids with autism have antibodies to the transport system of folic acid into the brain. So they, even if they're eating a perfect diet, which no one is, but say they get lots of greens, their folic acid in their blood is perfect. Well, they're not, it's not getting into their brain. And we know that that's such an important B vitamin for all of the brain functions that can create then brain problems. So by high dosing, it was found that if you high dose folinic acid, which then happened to be in the form of leucovorin, it can get into the brain by a different way. And so we can now replenish the brain's folic acid. And so it started being used, and there are many studies, but they are smaller. So it's not thousands of patients. So I've I've read that the Academy of Pediatrics isn't really even recommending leucovorin because the studies are too small. However, in the autism community, because there's a pretty good improvement, like about 2/3 of the kids have their autism get better with leucovorin. And there's the side effects are minimal, some irritability, some hyperactivity in some, and you can go up very slowly, but they're not serious side effects. So we want to treat when kids are young, and or even teenagers. I'm treating because I see a lot of kids with autism that have no language. They don't communicate well. They're frustrated. Anything we could possibly do to help
Yeah.
them, we want to do. And now, if there were bad side effects, then that would be a different story. But there doesn't seem to be at this point. And I've talked to Dr. Fry, the neurologist that did most of the recent studies, and he's not aware of bad side effects, just a little hyperactivity in some kids, and sometimes that's related to the fact that the kids are on the commercial brand, like from just your regular pharmacy, and there's fillers in those, and apparently some brands have lactase, and so when you get a little irritability, sometimes if you switch to a compounded version, which is more expensive, but then doesn't have the fillers, that will eliminate some of those side effects. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
basically we're, and of course, if you can try it and you start low and go slow, and if you start seeing things, irritability, or, people aren't getting better, then you would definitely want to try the compounded version, but then it's probably not, it's not 100% going to help, but it does help quite a few people.
Yeah. And I think what's so key is that you can titrate up, as you mentioned. So as
Right.
needed, if you do see some side effects, that you can try that too, right? Under your
Right.
guidance.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it sounds like it's neat that it's being talked about more and that it's becoming more common and in the field. I know you've been using it for a long time, but
Right.
I think the field is catching up.
Right.
So,
Right. Yeah, I have been. And the nice thing now is that the parents are really on board, because when you talk about a cancer rescue drug, and rightly so, people, need to research and themselves and understand, but it's nice that it's been brought out. And there is a book by Dr. Fry, so I can send you that. Like, I can send you some book recommendations for like diet. And then Dr. Fry wrote a book, The Folate Fix. So a lot of my families are reading that so that they're up to date on the information and understand what we're doing.
great. I think that would be fantastic to include as well in the show notes. And now you've also mentioned key nutrients like zinc, omega-3s, and you mentioned to me when we met also the broccoli sprout powder.
Right.
What role do those play in supporting focus, detoxification, and overall regulation?
Right. So when I see a child, I may just start them you know, on the nutrients I already know they need, because, I've never seen a kid with autism whose zinc level is normal. Now, I like zinc levels to be close to 100. So I should say that when you have, a level at a traditional lab like LabCorp, Quest, Rady Children's, their ranges are not what I'm using. So I'm using what's ideal for the brain and mental health, and it's been studied. There is data on that, but their ranges are much different than mine. So I'm using what's optimal, and that's what we often say in functional medicine. We don't want what's barely enough. We want optimal. And in autism, that seems to become very important. So I've had people that come in with labs and they're told, oh, your zinc level's normal, but it's it's really not normal. It just, according to, the range that was used, it was said to be normal, but it's very low. And, they say no zinc, no think. So I always tell people, remember that, no zinc, no think. So I always would put kids on at least 30 milligrams of zinc picolinate. Now I have kids that require much more than that, but that's a pretty good starting dose, even 3 or 4 year olds. I always do a multivitamin powder. So there's several that were created for kids with autism. There's a couple that I put in the show notes that have everything, including like methylation support, mitochondrial support. So the doctors that have created these have studied all the things that kind of need to be boosted in kids with autism. So that they're reputable. Like I know the doctors of the two ones, and they're part of our autism group, which is the MAPS group that you had mentioned. And that, they have created these products that they are expensive, but they have everything that, except that you still have to boost up a few, like have the children on extra zinc. And then the omega 3s generally are not going into a multi because I think that they're bulky and make the taste bad. So, and there are other multis that if the kids don't like, the two that have everything, there are other powders that they're good and they're created for kids with autism. And sometimes some of them say they're unflavored, and so maybe those, I'll go to those second if the ones that have everything, are not accepted by the child. But I want everyone on that multivitamin powder, and I've had kids just get better by starting that because it's so rich in nutrients, and it's like they have, the amount that you give according to the weight. And you put it in, water. And I say, we'll put a little favorite juice or whatever in it, or you could put it in a smoothie, in an acai bowl. They're usually kind of berry flavored. So I have everybody on one of those multivitamin powders, everybody on zinc, everybody on some omega-3. And, I like the kids to be on about 1,000 milligrams of omega-3s. So like Nordic Naturals makes tons of products, and they actually have gummies that have a pretty high amount. There's one gummy that has, I think, 1,200 milligrams. So if they'll take the gummies, then that would be an option. If they want liquid, then there's lots of liquid options. If they're really, really picky, Barleans makes the very best tasting omega-3. They do have a few more additives to try to make it taste good, and it's more dilute. But I've had kids that all the other vitamins get dumped into it because it tastes so good. So they have like kiwi lime pie and, some, I haven't tasted it, but the reports are that it tastes very good. So I always like the omega-3s. I also like, broccoli sprouts powder. So it has to have, or they have to have tested it and make sure that it's like an activated form. So you have to be a little bit careful on that. Can I say brands or?
Sure. Yeah.
So I get a powder from Amazon by, it's Koyah. I could send you the link. And there's one, and they have tested it to make sure that it's active and has this one enzyme that needs to be present to make the broccoli sprouts active. So I don't know about every product. There's very good swallow products, but of course the kids don't swallow the pills. So that's why I've gone with the powder. And of course, if you want to throw broccoli sprouts into a smoothie, one could do that too, but just very good for detox. So I have the parents try to mix some of the sprout powder into either smoothies or like spaghetti sauce, or, just if there's some food that you could put it in that would it would blend in okay, then that's what we do.
Yeah, very extensive, and it makes a lot of sense. I think it's incredibly important, to consider all of these approaches. And I know that one of the big things too in this field with autism in particular is the gut health. And so I'd love to have you share just a little bit about kind of your focus and the things you commonly see. I certainly have seen many clients with gut issues, and I know this is a very common story in our field. So let's talk a little bit
Right.
about what goes on in the gut.
Right. Well, so what comes up the very most is surprise, surprise, constipation. The kids, not everyone, but many of the kids are constipated and they don't go every day. So for detox purposes, we want them to go every day. And so that's where I would add some magnesium citrate. So that would be one other optional nutrient if somebody's constipated. I'm not a huge fan of Miralax, although for some patients they have to use it for a short while, and then we might be able to transition them over to magnesium citrate. So, the microbiome is a developing field, and studies have shown that the microbiome of the kids with autism is different than the normal population. So we know there's microbiome issues, and we want the healthiest microbiome. And of course, and they've even in Australia done fecal transplants and found that over 2 years following a fecal transplant in kids with autism, that many of the kids' autism improved just with that intervention. So we know that's important. The difficulty is, the way I look at the microbiome is that it's got roots, and like probiotics, they can change things temporarily, but then when they're passed out, things can go back. And I find that, well, and that's why I think that the fecal transplants have been suggested as one possible treatment, is that it's hard to get rid of roots. Roots of the microbiome, kind of, it grows back. But basically, we start with diet and fiber, fermented foods if the child will take the fermented foods. I like to do a gut test, so I tend to use the Genova stool test, and that gives you a lot of markers of where your gut is in terms of inflammation, the wrong type of bacteria being present, just and there's herbal products and different things you can do to try to kill the bad bacteria, and then try to do other nutrients to make the good bacteria flourish. But we start with the diet, because you're not going to get if someone's eating processed food and non-organic, you're not going to get very far. So the problem with the non-organic food is most of it has Roundup, or glyphosate. It's actually glyphosate, which is from Roundup, the weed killer. Well, it not only kills weeds, but it kills our good bacteria. So it's sort of like when we're talking about someone wants me to detox their child, but they have to also not put toxins into their child. Well, with the gut bacteria, if I want to work on their microbiome, they also have to be feeding their child foods that will help their microbiome. And if they're feeding a lot of foods with Roundup in it, you're not going to get you're not going to get a good result.
Right.
A lot of the kids also will have problems with yeast overgrowth. Well, if the kids eating a lot of starch and sugar, you could kill the yeast, but it'll come back. So it's kind of a two-pronged. So that's why I might not have looked at the stool first off until we get the diet, so that it's the right diet for a good, healthy
Yeah.
gut. And then we can get a gut test and do some work on that.
Yeah. I think that's just another testament to that step-by-step process you're taking, that, you're really methodical and making sure that what you're doing is going to be successful and effective.
Right. Right. If it is only temporary, then it's expensive and a lot of work to be giving all these supplements. So if it only gives you temporary improvement because the diet isn't can't sustain the changes, then it doesn't seem like it's worthwhile.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, well, I'd love to have you, before we wrap up, I'd love to have you share just any other resources. You don't need to go through a list of all of them because I will include them, and you have sent me such a beautiful list of resources. So, but if there's anything in particular that stands out that you haven't shared already to take note of, I'd love to have you have a chance to share that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one thing, so I am going to send you, I'll look again. I'm a big book reader, or I have all my books, and that's how I remember like who says what, and, in the autism world and where this information. So I will send you, a few more books for the list. Like the nutritional book is by Julie Matthews, who's kind of the big autism diet person. And she has a pretty, good book. But in addition, I want to mention that there's parent support through TACANow.org. So I belong to MAPS, which is the doctor part of that same group. The parent group, is TACA Now, and parents can join that. And there's just a wealth of information. There's a whole book that I have parents buy that goes through all of the interventions, because it is complicated. But if you just take it step by step, then you can do it. You can figure it out. And so I think that would be something I'd encourage parents to do. And they can assign you another parent mentor who can talk about what they did for their child. And it's all geared toward this biomedical approach, which is what I do. They have conferences a couple times a year where it's not watered down information. It's some of the same information the doctors hear. I even will listen to it because it's such good information. They'll have
Right.
the researchers that are doing all the research, like the neurologist that's put out the studies on leucovorin. There's Dr. Adams is working on the fecal transplant, calling it like a microbiota transfer, trying to get it FDA approved. So the researchers will be there. So I would encourage parents to join that group and, get the research it themselves through that. And then, I'll send you some book lists, and I'm not sure, I can't remember what else
Fantastic.
I included in that list, but
Yeah, that's okay. It was, there were so many things. I really appreciated it. And I think it's going to be so helpful. So thank you for doing that. And I'd love to have you just share, one last thing. If you have anything last piece you'd like to share with families that are going through these kinds of treatments or considering them or learning about them, what's one last thing you'd like to share with them?
well, I would say everybody gets better. And it's so, not everyone like becomes not autistic, but everyone gets better. And it is doable. And if it feels not doable, like just do it step by step slowly. So it is doable. The kids get better. You're being asked to go over and above with parenting, but if you have a kid with autism, there's no choice with that. You've got this child, and the goal is to have them be as functional as they can as a young adult, and it will pay off. Like every increment of improvement and communication and less irritability will pay off, because they'll become, you know, better young adults. And even the kids that don't talk, I have some wonderful non-speakers that are functional. I mean, they understand everything. They're smart. They can type poetry. They can read. So even if a child doesn't have language, it doesn't mean that they won't be able to progress and have a place in life.
Right. Absolutely. I love that. And so much hope in that share. And I want to make sure you have a chance to share how people can find you as well. And we will, of course, include that in the notes too.
Okay. Well, I have, my website. There's a shortened version that I give, like Lisa, LISAJLMD.com. And that then goes to Lisa Loegering, MD.com, but Loegering's too hard to spell. And I have a short waiting list. It's just a couple months right now. I only see kids in California because my license is for California, and that's the way our country works right now. I can do telemedicine. I can prescribe Leucovorin over telemedicine. I don't prescribe psych meds with telemedicine, but I am working with people all over California, and most of the autism interventions are not psych meds that I use.
Right.
And so I can pretty much work with people through telemedicine with all
Wonderful.
of those interventions, and order the tests and do all the protocol and do Leucovorin.
Fantastic. Wonderful. Well, we will include that website in our show notes. And this was just such a wealth of information. I'm so glad that you were able to come on and share all of this knowledge and expertise of so many years of practicing and supporting our kids. And just thank you so much for being here today and sharing everything that you know that works. So.
Well, you're very welcome. And anytime, like I said, there's a lot. It's probably overwhelming. Like I said, I was overwhelmed. And if I'm overwhelmed, I mean, at the beginning of this, then I can't imagine how a parent would feel being just dropped into this world. So if you ever want to rediscuss any parts of this, I'd be glad to.
Yes, I would love that. Yes, I will take you up on it. I think it's so important.
Like just even testing, one could kind of break it up into different areas, just again to review and simplify.
Absolutely. Well, let's do it. I think it would be great. And it'd be great to get that information out there. So I appreciate that offer. And I will definitely be following up with you. So thank you so much.
Okay. Well, thank you. All right.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
I'm dancing on the edge again. The wind is calling my name. I'm dancing on the edge again. This time I'm not looking back, babe. You can change me, you can tell me down. I'll be that goes in every place I fight. I break the molds with the rebel's mind. I'm a hurricane of
The information provided on this podcast is for general informational purposes only. The content shared is based on the experiences, opinions, and perspectives of the hosts and their guests and should not be construed as medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment recommendations. The discussions and topics covered are intended to foster understanding and awareness of autism therapies, but are not a substitute for professional medical guidance. Before making any decisions regarding therapies or treatments, we strongly encourage you to consult with a qualified healthcare provider who can provide personalized recommendations based on your unique circumstances. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledge and agree that the hosts, guests, and producers are not responsible for any consequences, damages, or outcomes arising from the use or application of any information during the show.